New Mexico Territory, 1875. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the valley as Kate Sullivan stood on the porch of her father's ranch house, her ranch house now. Wind tugged at her copper hair as she surveyed the vast expanse of land that stretched toward the distant mountains. 3 months since they'd laid Patrick Sullivan in the hard New Mexico earth, and still she expected to hear his booming voice calling her name from the stables. "You're sure about this?" Sarah's voice broke the silence, her younger sister appearing beside her with a shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, despite the mild autumn day. Kate nodded, not trusting her voice immediately. "This land is all I have left of him," she finally said. "Besides, where else would I go?" Sarah sighed, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear, lighter than Kate's fiery red, just as their temperaments differed. "You could come with us to Santa Fe. David's father has connections. He could find you suitable work, perhaps as a teacher." "A teacher," Kate repeated flatly. "Locked inside 4 walls all day, teaching other people's children their letters, while some man decides my worth with each paycheck?" She shook her head. "No, thank you." "It's not proper for a woman to run a ranch alone, Catherine," Sarah insisted, using the full name that always irritated Kate. "People talk." "Let them," Kate replied, her green eyes hardening. "I've never cared much for propriety anyway." Sarah placed a gentle hand on her sister's arm. "The wedding is in 3 weeks. After that, David and I leave for Santa Fe." Her voice softened. "You'll be all alone up here when the snows come." Kate swallowed the lump forming in her throat. She had known this day was coming since Sarah had announced her engagement 6 months ago, but facing the reality of complete solitude was different than imagining it. "The Mendez family will help," Kate said, referring to the Mexican family who worked part-time on the ranch. "And I'll hire more hands before winter." Sarah's doubtful expression said everything she wouldn't voice aloud. They both knew the truth. Men in the territory were reluctant to work for a woman, especially one as headstrong as Kate Sullivan. Those willing to consider it changed their minds quickly upon meeting the sharp-tongued, independent woman with hair like wildfire and eyes that matched her temper. "Mr. Richardson offered to buy the ranch again yesterday," Sarah mentioned carefully. "David says it's more than fair." Kate's spine stiffened. "Richardson wants our water rights. He's been trying to push Pa off this land for years. And now he's trying to push you," Sarah completed softly. "Kate, be reasonable. This is no life for a woman." Kate turned to face her sister fully. "Pa taught me everything he knew. I can ride, shoot, and run this ranch every bit as well as any man." "That's not what I meant," Sarah protested, though they both knew it was exactly what she meant. "The winters are brutal up here. You'll be cut off from town for weeks, maybe months." Kate squared her shoulders. "Then I'd better stock up on supplies, hadn't I?" The conversation ended there, as it always did. The sisters loved each other fiercely, but they had chosen different paths. Sarah had always yearned for society, security, and the comforts of town life. Kate found her freedom in the open spaces, in the challenge of working the land, in the legacy her father had built from nothing. 2 days later, Kate rode into the small settlement of Cielo Rojo with a list of supplies and a determination to find ranch hands before winter set in. The general store was buzzing with activity, unusual for a Tuesday morning. "Miss Sullivan," Mr. Peterson greeted her as she entered, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose. "We were just discussing the trouble up in the foothills." Kate tied her list to the counter. "What trouble?" "Apache," said a gruff voice behind her. Kate turned to see Sheriff Dawson leaning against a barrel of flour, his weathered face grim. "Band of Jicarillas moved down from the high country earlier than usual. Raided the Thompson place yesterday." A murmur went through the small crowd gathered in the store. "Anyone hurt?" Kate asked, thinking of the elderly couple who ran the small homestead north of her property. "Took some livestock, that's all. Thompson fired some warning shots and they scattered," Dawson replied. "Army's been notified." "Savages," muttered a man Kate recognized as one of Richardson's ranch hands. "Should round the whole lot up and put them on reservations where they belong." Kate bit her tongue. Her father had always maintained a respectful distance with the native tribes, particularly the Jicarilla Apache, whose ancestral lands included parts of what was now the Sullivan Ranch. In the 15 years they had lived there, they'd never had trouble. "Miss Sullivan," Peterson lowered his voice as he began gathering her supplies, "you being up there alone, Perhaps you should consider staying in town until this business is settled. I'm not alone, Kate lied smoothly. I've hired hands for the winter. Peterson looked skeptical but didn't argue. Kate finished her business quickly, ignoring the whispers that followed her out the door. She was loading the wagon when Sheriff Dawson approached. "Those hands you mentioned," he said without preamble. "I know most men looking for work around here. Who'd you hire?" Kate secured a sack of flour before turning to face him. "I'm still looking," she admitted reluctantly. Dawson nodded, unsurprised. "Thought as much. Listen, Kate, your pa was a good man and a friend. He'd want me looking out for you." He adjusted his hat. "I can spare Deputy Collins for a few weeks. He can stay out at the ranch, help you get set for winter." Kate's pride bristled. "Thank you, Sheriff, but that won't be necessary." It wasn't a suggestion. Dawson's tone hardened. "Collins will be out tomorrow. And Kate," he lowered his voice, "keep that rifle of yours loaded. Jicarilla are usually peaceful enough, but something's got them stirred up this year." The ride home was longer than usual, Kate's thoughts churning with irritation at Dawson's high-handedness and concern about the Apache situation. The last thing she needed was more complications. As the wagon crested the final hill before the ranch, Kate pulled the horses to a sudden stop. A figure stood by the corral, tall, motionless, watching her approach. For a moment, fear clutched at her chest. Then the figure moved into the fading sunlight, and she saw him clearly for the first time. He was Apache, unmistakably so, with high cheekbones and copper skin. His black hair hung long and straight past his shoulders, free of ornament except for a single feather tied at the back. He wore buckskin leggings and a blue cotton shirt that had once belonged to a white man. A knife was sheathed at his hip, but he carried no other visible weapons. What struck Kate most were his eyes, dark as midnight, watching her with an intensity that made her throat go dry. He showed no aggression, made no move toward her, simply stood his ground as she cautiously urged the wagon forward. When she was 20 feet away, she reached for the rifle tucked beside the seat. "I wouldn't," he said, his voice deep and unexpectedly smooth, his English perfect and only slightly accented. "If I meant harm, you'd never have seen me." Kate kept her hand near the rifle but didn't draw it. "What do you want?" "Work," he replied simply. "Food and shelter for the winter." Kate almost laughed at the absurdity. "You're looking for work? Here?" He nodded once, his expression unchanged. "I am Akila of the Jicarilla people. I know horses, cattle. I can hunt, repair buildings." His eyes swept across the ranch, noting the loose boards on the stable, the unrepaired fence line to the north. "You need help before snow comes." "And why would an Apache want to work for a white woman?" Kate asked bluntly. Something flickered in his dark eyes. Amusement, perhaps. "Same reason white man works. To eat." Despite her wariness, Kate couldn't deny the truth in his assessment of the ranch's condition. Winter came early to the northern New Mexico mountains, and she was woefully behind in preparations. Still, taking on an Apache worker when tensions were rising seemed like madness. "My sister's coming back tomorrow with her fiancé," she lied, "and the sheriff's sending a deputy to stay here." If she expected this news to deter him, she was disappointed. Akila simply nodded. More work to be done before they arrived then. Before Kate could respond, he turned and walked to the rear of her wagon, beginning to unload her supplies with efficient movements. She remained on the seat, watching in disbelief as he carried sacks and crates to the porch with ease. "I haven't agreed to hire you," she called, finally climbing down. Akila paused, a barrel of salt pork balanced on one shoulder. "You will," he said with quiet certainty, before continuing toward the house. Kate stood in the yard, torn between outrage at his presumption and reluctant admiration for his confidence. She watched him work, noting the fluid strength in his movements and the careful way he arranged her supplies on the porch. As the sun dipped below the mountains, casting the valley in deep purple shadows, Kate made her decision. She could send him away tomorrow when Deputy Collins arrived. One night of help unloading supplies couldn't hurt. "There's a cot in the tack room," she said when he'd finished. "You can sleep there tonight. We'll discuss terms in the morning." Akila inclined his head slightly, not quite a bow, but an acknowledgement. As Kate turned to go inside, she felt his eyes on her back, intense and unreadable. She straightened her spine and quickened her pace, fighting the strange sensation his gaze produced. She had just reached the door when his voice stopped her. "The red-tailed hawk," he said. Kate turned, confused by the non sequitur. Akila gestured toward her hair, catching the last rays of sunlight. "My people call it the firebird, proud, fierce, not easily tamed." Something in his tone made heat rise to her cheeks. Without responding, Kate entered the house and closed the door firmly behind her. She leaned against it, heart beating unexpectedly fast. What had she just done? Invited an Apache, a stranger, to stay on her property. If the townspeople found out, they'd think she'd lost her mind. Perhaps she had. Through the window, she watched Akila move toward the stables, his stride unhurried and graceful. There was something both wild and dignified about him, something that made her simultaneously wary and curious. Kate shook her head to clear it. Tomorrow, Deputy Collins would arrive, and she would send Akila on his way. One night. What could possibly happen in one night? As darkness fell across the Sullivan ranch, neither Kate nor her unexpected visitor could have imagined how completely their lives were about to change, or how the approaching winter would test them both in ways they could never have prepared for. By the third day, Deputy Collins still hadn't arrived, and Kate found herself reluctantly accepting Akila's continued presence. She told herself it was practical necessity. The work he'd accomplished in just 2 days would have taken her weeks alone. Akila rose before dawn each morning and worked until well after sunset. He repaired fences, reinforced the barn roof, chopped endless cords of firewood, and tended to the livestock with a quiet competence that both impressed and irritated Kate. She had grown used to proving herself, to working twice as hard as any man to earn half the respect. Akila's effortless skill was a constant reminder of how much she needed help, no matter how fiercely she denied it. "You don't have to keep watching me," he said, without turning as Kate stood at the edge of the corral, observing him gentle, a nervous mare. "I won't steal your horses." Kate flushed, embarrassed at being so transparent. "I'm making sure you're doing it right," she countered, though they both knew the lie for what it was. No one handled horses better than Akila, something even Kate had to grudgingly admit. He glanced over his shoulder, a rare half-smile tugging at his lips. "And am I? Doing it right?" The question felt loaded with meaning beyond the words themselves. Kate turned away, uncomfortable with the warmth that flickered through her at that slight smile. "It'll do," she said curtly. "When you're finished, the north fence still needs mending." That evening, Kate sat at her father's desk, updating the ranch ledger by lamplight. The figures weren't encouraging. The ranch had been struggling even before her father's death, and without enough hands to manage the cattle properly, they'd lost more than they should have to predators and harsh conditions. A soft knock at the door startled her. Akila stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the darkness outside. "Storm coming," he said simply. Kate rose and followed him onto the porch. The air had changed, carrying a sharp bite that hadn't been there hours before. Far to the north, lightning illuminated the underside of heavy clouds. "How bad?" she asked, wrapping her arms around herself against the sudden chill. "Bad," Akila replied. "First big snow, too early." He turned to her, his expression grave. "Cattle in the high pasture need to come down tonight." Kate's stomach dropped. The high pasture was nearly 2 hours' ride away, and bringing the herd down in darkness would be dangerous, even without an approaching storm. "We can't possibly," she began, but Akila was already moving toward the stables. "No time to argue," he called over his shoulder. "Saddle your horse." Indignation flared at being ordered about on her own ranch, but the urgency in Akila's voice overrode her pride. 20 minutes later, they rode out together, cloaked against the biting wind, heading toward the northern pastures with darkness falling rapidly around them. They worked in near-silent coordination, Kate taking the western edge of the scattered herd, while Akila circled to the east. The cattle were reluctant to move, sensing the approaching storm, but hesitant to leave familiar grazing grounds. By the time they had the herd moving south, the first fat snowflakes were swirling through the air. "We need to move faster," Akila shouted across the distance between them, his voice nearly lost in the rising wind. Kate nodded, urging her horse forward. The temperature was dropping rapidly, snow beginning to accumulate on her shoulders and hat. The cattle lowed anxiously, picking up their pace as the storm intensified. They were still an hour from the ranch when the storm hit with full force. Snow drove horizontally, stinging Kate's face and obscuring her vision. The wind howled through the pines, a banshee wail that spooked the already nervous cattle. "Stay with the herd," Akila called, barely visible through the whiteout. "I'll keep them moving." Kate fought to control her horse as they pressed forward through deepening snow. Her fingers grew numb within her gloves, her face burning with cold despite the scarf pulled across her mouth and nose. Disorientation set in as all landmarks disappeared in the white blur of the storm. A sudden movement to her right, a young steer bolting from the herd, panicked by the storm. Without thinking, Kate wheeled her horse to pursue, pushing away from the main group. She managed to turn the steer back toward the others, but as she did, a gust of wind more powerful than the others hit her broadside. Kate's horse reared, throwing her from the saddle. She landed hard, the breath knocked from her lungs. For a moment, she lay stunned in the snow, the world spinning around her. When she tried to rise, pain shot through her ankle, and she collapsed back with a cry that was lost in the howling wind. "Akila!" she shouted, but her voice couldn't carry against the storm. Her horse had disappeared, spooked by her fall. The cattle and Akila with them were nowhere to be seen through the blinding snow. Panic threatened to overwhelm her as the reality of her situation became clear. Alone in a blizzard, injured with night falling and temperatures plummeting, people died this way every winter in the New Mexico mountains. Kate forced herself to think. She needed shelter, and quickly. Using a fallen branch as a makeshift crutch, she struggled to her feet. Each step sent jolts of pain through her ankle, but she pushed forward, searching desperately for anything that might offer protection from the storm. The minutes stretched endlessly as Kate fought through deepening snow. Her movements became sluggish, her thoughts clouded. When she stumbled against a rock outcropping, she collapsed beside it, unable to go further. The small overhang offered minimal shelter, but it was enough to block the worst of the wind. Kate huddled against the stone, her body trembling violently with cold. As consciousness began to slip away, Kate thought she heard her name on the wind. A hallucination, she decided distantly. No one could find her in this white hell. "Kate!" The voice came again, closer this time. Through half-closed eyes, she saw a dark shape materializing from the whiteness. Strong hands gripped her shoulders, a face appearing inches from her own. Akila, snow crusting his hair and eyelashes, concern etched in his normally impassive features. "Can you stand?" he asked, his voice cutting through the fog in her mind. Kate tried to respond, but her lips felt frozen. Akila didn't wait for an answer. With remarkable gentleness, he lifted her into his arms, cradling her against his chest. Even through layers of cold clothing, she could feel the heat of his body, a stark contrast to her own chilled flesh. "Horse?" she managed to say through chattering teeth. "Lost my horse." "Found him," Akila replied. "Led me to you. Hold on." Kate had no choice but to cling to him as he carried her through the storm. Her head rested against his shoulder, her face turned into the warmth of his neck. Despite her predicament, she was acutely aware of his strength, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the security of his arms around her. The journey back to the ranch passed in a blur of white and cold and pain. At some point, Akila had set her on his horse, mounting behind her to keep her upright in the saddle. His arms encircled her, one hand holding the reins, the other wrapped firmly around her waist. Kate leaned back against him, too exhausted and cold to maintain her usual reserve. When they finally reached the ranch house, Kate was barely conscious. She was vaguely aware of being carried inside, of the blessed warmth enveloping her as Akila placed her near the fireplace. He moved with swift efficiency, building up the fire until it roared in the hearth. "Your clothes are wet through," he said, kneeling beside her. "They need to come off." Under normal circumstances, Kate would have been scandalized by the suggestion. Now she could only nod weakly, her body shivering uncontrollably. With impersonal care, Akila removed her boots first, his expression growing concerned when he saw her swollen ankle. His hands were surprisingly gentle as he worked, removing her sodden outer garments with efficient movements. He preserved her modesty as much as possible, immediately wrapping her in a thick quilt once the wet clothing had been discarded. Kate's shivers gradually subsided as warmth returned to her limbs. Akila examined her ankle carefully, his touch clinical and respectful. "Not broken," he pronounced. "Bad sprain. Need to wrap it." He moved away briefly, returning with strips of cloth. With deft fingers, he bandaged her ankle, his dark head bent in concentration. Kate watched him through half-lidded eyes, seeing him truly for the first time, not as an intruder or an unwelcome necessity, but as the man who had just saved her life. When he finished with her ankle, Akila brought her tea brewed with herbs from a small pouch he carried. It tasted strange, but not unpleasant, and soon a comforting warmth spread through her body. "The cattle?" she asked, suddenly remembering their purpose for being out in the storm. "Safe," Akila assured her. "In the lower pasture. I went back after bringing you here." Kate stared at him in disbelief. He had gone back out into that howling nightmare to finish the job, after already saving her. "You didn't have to do that." Akila shrugged. "Your cattle, your livelihood." He paused, watching her face. "Your father built this place. You fight to keep it. I respect that." The simple statement, delivered without sentiment or expectation, touched Kate deeply. No one else, not Sarah, not the townspeople, certainly not Richardson, understood her attachment to the ranch. Yet this stranger, this Apache whom she had regarded with such suspicion, seemed to see straight to the heart of her. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. Akila was silent for a long moment, stoking the fire. "My people say when you save a life, you become responsible for it," he finally replied. "Besides," he added, the ghost of a smile passing across his face, "promised work for food and shelter, this is work." Despite everything, the pain, the exhaustion, the lingering cold, Kate found herself smiling back. That was not in the job description. "Should have written it down," Akila countered, his dark eyes warming with subtle humor. Kate felt something shift between them in that moment, some invisible barrier dissolving in the firelight. Perhaps it was the shared ordeal, or perhaps it was simply that near-death experiences had a way of stripping away pretenses and prejudices. Whatever the reason, as Kate drifted toward sleep, warmed by the fire and the herbal tea, she knew that everything had changed. The Apache who had appeared so suddenly at her ranch was no longer a stranger to be feared or distrusted. He was Akila, the man who had carried her through a blizzard, who had gone back into the storm to save her cattle, who now kept watch beside her with quiet vigilance. And for the first time since her father's death, Kate didn't feel quite so alone. Outside, the storm raged on, burying the Sullivan ranch under a white blanket that would isolate them from the rest of the world for days to come. Neither of them could have known then how that isolation would transform them both, or how the walls Kate had built around her heart would soon begin to crumble, just as inevitably as snow melting in the spring sun. The storm lasted 3 days, leaving behind 4 feet of snow and complete isolation. Deputy Collins would not be coming anytime soon. The trail to town was impassable. Kate and Akila were alone together on the ranch, cut off from the world by a vast white silence. Kate's ankle healed slowly. For the first week, she was largely confined to the house, forced to rely on Akila for even the most basic tasks. It was a humbling experience for someone who prided herself on self-sufficiency. Each morning, he would help her to a chair by the window before heading out to tend the livestock. Each evening, he would return, snow clinging to his clothes and hair, to prepare simple meals they ate together by the fire. Their conversations were stilted at first, punctuated by long silences. Gradually, however, Kate found herself asking questions about his life, his people, the world he came from that was so different from her own. "Why aren't you with your tribe for the winter?" she asked one evening as they sat before the hearth, the wind whistling around the corners of the house. Akila's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. "Complicated," he said after a pause. "I have time," Kate replied dryly, gesturing to the snow-covered landscape outside. A faint smile touched Akila's lips. "My father was Jicarilla," he began slowly. "My mother was Mexican. Her family worked for Spanish settlers." He poked at the fire, sending sparks up the chimney. "I was raised in both worlds, belonging to neither." Kate watched his face in the firelight, seeing the weight of that statement in the set of his shoulders. "The tribe accepted you, though." "Some did, some didn't." Akila shrugged. "I learned the ways of my father's people, became a scout for them. Later, for the army." His eyes met hers. "That's where I learned English, working for white soldiers who wanted to find my own people." The irony wasn't lost on Kate. That must have been difficult. "Survival rarely offers easy choices," he replied. I guided them to empty camps, warned my people when I could." His voice hardened slightly. "Eventually, an officer realized what I was doing. I left before they could hang me. And your people, wouldn't they take you back?" Akila's gaze returned to the fire. "Some think I betrayed them by working with the army at all. Others understand. I visit, help when needed. But I don't stay." "So you wander," Kate said softly. "Between worlds." "As do you," Akila countered, his perceptive gaze returning to her face. "Not quite the proper lady your sister wishes you to be. Not quite the man this land expects its masters to be." Kate was startled by his insight. "I never thought of it that way." "Two outsiders," Akila said with a slight nod. "Perhaps that is why the spirits brought me here." Kate raised an eyebrow. "I thought you came looking for work." That rare smile appeared again, transforming his solemn features. "Perhaps both are true." As days turned into weeks, they fell into a routine of shared work and quiet evenings. Kate insisted on resuming her duties as soon as she could walk, though Akila hovered nearby whenever she attempted anything strenuous. His protectiveness both irritated and secretly pleased her, though she would never have admitted the latter. She began to notice things about him: the graceful economy of his movements, the way sunlight gleamed on his black hair, the surprising gentleness of his hands when tending injured animals. Sometimes she would look up to find him watching her with an intensity that sent heat climbing to her cheeks. One afternoon, Kate was brushing her hair by the window when she glanced outside to see Akila splitting wood in the yard. He had removed his shirt despite the cold, and she found herself transfixed by the fluid strength of his movements, the play of muscles beneath copper skin. When he paused to wipe sweat from his brow and looked up to catch her watching, Kate quickly stepped away from the window, her heart beating unexpectedly fast. That night, unable to sleep, she slipped from bed and moved to the main room to stoke the fire. As she knelt before the hearth, she heard a soft sound behind her. Turning, she found Akila standing in the doorway to the small room off the kitchen where he now slept. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, trying to sound casual despite being acutely aware of her nightgown and loose hair. Akila nodded, crossing to sit on the floor near her. "Cold night," he offered, though they both knew the house was warm enough. The firelight cast flickering shadows across his features, highlighting the strong lines of his face. Kate suddenly found it difficult to meet his eyes. "Your hair," he said softly. "It looks like the fire when it's down." Kate touched the copper strands self-consciously. "My father used to say it matched my temper." "He was right," Akila replied, a smile in his voice. "Fierce, proud." "You say that like it's a good thing," Kate said, finally looking at him. "It is," he answered simply. "Spirit like yours keeps people alive out here." Something in his tone made her breath catch. They were sitting closer now, though Kate couldn't remember either of them moving. The silence between them hummed with unspoken words. "We should sleep," Kate said suddenly, rising to her feet. "Early morning tomorrow." Akila stood as well, his height making her feel unexpectedly small. "Yes," he agreed, though neither made any move to leave. For one breathless moment, Kate thought he might reach for her. Instead, he stepped back, inclining his head slightly before returning to his room. Kate remained by the fire long after he'd gone, trying to understand the conflicting emotions churning within her. The next morning brought a brief respite from the snow. The sun emerged, turning the white landscape into a sea of diamonds. "I need to check the western fence line," Kate announced after breakfast. "There might be cattle stranded in the ravine there." Akila frowned. "Too far. Your ankle is fine," Kate interrupted. "I've been cooped up for weeks. I need this, Akila." He studied her for a long moment before nodding reluctantly. "I'll saddle the horses." They rode out together, the snow crunching beneath their horses' hooves. The air was crisp and clean, the silence broken only by occasional bird song and the soft sounds of their passage. Kate reveled in the freedom of being outdoors again, her cheeks flushed with cold and exhilaration. They had just crested a small rise when Akila suddenly raised a hand, signaling her to stop. His posture had changed, alert and tense. "What is it?" Kate whispered, instantly on guard. Akila scanned the tree line. "Riders," he said quietly. "3, maybe 4. Kate followed his gaze but saw nothing. "How can you tell?" Instead of answering, Akila dismounted smoothly, moving to a nearby pine. He knelt, examining something in the snow before looking back at her with concern. Army tracks. Fresh. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature ran through Kate. Looking for you. Perhaps. Akila remounted, his expression grim. We should return to the ranch. They rode back in tense silence, taking a circuitous route that would hide their tracks. As they approached the ranch from the south, Akila suddenly reined in his horse. "Smoke!" he said, pointing toward the house. "Someone's there." Kate squinted against the glare of the snow. Sure enough, smoke was rising from the chimney. More smoke than should have been there from the banked morning fire they'd left. "Stay here," Akila instructed, but Kate was already urging her horse forward. "It's my ranch," she said firmly. "I'll go first." Akila caught up to her, his face tight with concern. "Stubborn woman," he muttered. Despite the tension, Kate felt a smile tug at her lips. "You're just figuring that out now." As they approached the house, the door swung open. A figure stepped onto the porch, tall, uniformed, a rifle held casually in one hand. Kate recognized him immediately. "Captain Monroe," she called, trying to keep her voice steady. James Monroe was a career Army officer stationed at Fort Union. Kate had met him several times in town, where he had made his interest in her quite clear. She had rebuffed his advances politely but firmly, uncomfortable with his calculating gaze and too smooth manner. "Miss Sullivan?" Monroe replied, a smile spreading across his handsome face. The smile vanished when he noticed Akila beside her. "I see you have company." Kate dismounted, moving forward with deliberate casualness. "Captain Monroe, this is Akila. He's been helping me with the ranch this winter. What brings you all the way out here?" Monroe's cold eyes remained fixed on Akila. "Interesting choice of hired help, Miss Sullivan, particularly given the recent Apache raids in the area." "There have been no raids near my property," Kate replied evenly. "Indeed?" Monroe finally looked at her, his expression skeptical. "Nevertheless, we're patrolling the area. Apache renegades have been causing trouble. One in particular, a half-breed scout who deserted last year, dangerous fellow." Kate kept her expression neutral, though her heart had begun to race. Beside her, she could feel Akila's tension, though his face betrayed nothing. "I haven't seen any strangers," she lied smoothly. "Apart from you and your men, of course." Monroe studied her for a long moment before his gaze slid back to Akila. "And you are... what exactly?" "Jicarilla." "Yes," Akila answered, his voice devoid of emotion. "From which band?" "Northern Mountains." Monroe's eyes narrowed. "Strange time of year to be away from your people, isn't it?" Akila shrugged. "Work is work." "Indeed," Monroe repeated, the word heavy with disbelief. He turned back to Kate, his manner softening artificially. "Miss Sullivan, I must insist you accompany us back to town. It's not safe for a woman alone out here." "I'm not alone," Kate pointed out. "And this is my home, Captain. I have no intention of leaving it." Monroe's jaw tightened. "Perhaps we could discuss this privately." His glance toward Akila made the implication clear. Kate stood her ground. "Anything you have to say can be said in front of my employee." For a moment, anger flashed across Monroe's features before he smoothed it away behind a professional mask. "Very well. We'll be patrolling this area regularly. If you see anything suspicious, you'll inform us immediately." "Of course," Kate agreed, knowing she would do no such thing. Monroe stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Your father was a respected man, Miss Sullivan. He wouldn't want to see his daughter's reputation tarnished by unfortunate associations." Kate's temper flared. "My father taught me to judge men by their actions, not their heritage," she replied coldly. "Now, if you've quite finished, we have work to return to." Monroe's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We'll be camped at Thompson's place for the next few days. Send word if you need assistance." With a final warning look at Akila, he turned and strode back into the house, emerging moments later with two other soldiers Kate hadn't noticed before. They watched in tense silence as Monroe and his men mounted up and rode away. Only when the soldiers had disappeared beyond the ridge did Kate release the breath she'd been holding. "You should not have lied for me," Akila said quietly. Kate turned to him, chin raised defiantly. "Should I have turned you over to them instead? It would have been safer for you." "Maybe I'm tired of doing what's safe," she replied, brushing past him toward the house. Inside, Kate paced the main room, anger and worry churning inside her. "He'll be back," she said. "Monroe isn't the type to let things go." Akila stood by the window, watching the horizon where the soldiers had disappeared. I should leave. Tonight. No! The word burst from Kate with surprising force. She moderated her tone. The snow is still too deep in the passes. You'd never make it. I've survived worse, Akila said, but his resolution seemed to waver. Kate approached him slowly. Monroe said they'd be at the Thompson place for a few days. That gives us time to think. She hesitated before adding, I won't let them take you, Akila. Something changed in his expression then, a softening around the eyes, a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show. Why do you care what happens to me? Kate couldn't answer immediately. The question cut too close to feelings she wasn't ready to examine. You saved my life, she said finally. I repay my debts. If Akila was disappointed by her answer, he didn't show it. He merely nodded and moved away from the window. We should bring in more firewood before dark. The encounter with Monroe cast a shadow over the ranch. Akila took to scanning the horizon regularly, a habit born of years spent in danger. Kate found herself jumping at unexpected sounds, her hand straying to the rifle kept loaded by the door. 3 days passed without sign of the soldiers. On the 4th morning, Kate awoke to the sound of hoofbeats. Her heart leapt into her throat as she rushed to the window, expecting to see Monroe and his men returning. Instead, a single rider approached, a woman bundled against the cold, her horse struggling through the snow. It took Kate a moment to recognize her sister. Sarah, she exclaimed, hurrying outside without a coat. Sarah dismounted awkwardly, her face pale with cold and fatigue. Kate, she managed, her voice trembling. Thank heavens! Kate embraced her sister, shocked by how thin she felt beneath her heavy coat. What are you doing here? Where's David? Sarah's face crumpled. Gone, she whispered. They're all gone. Before Kate could question her further, Akila appeared from the barn, drawn by the commotion. Sarah stiffened in Kate's arms, her eyes widening with fear. It's all right, Kate said quickly. This is Akila. He works for me. She turned to Akila. My sister, Sarah. Akila nodded respectfully but kept his distance, sensing Sarah's discomfort. I'll tend to her horse, he said, moving forward to take the reins. Sarah watched him lead her mount away, her expression a mixture of fear and confusion. An Apache? Here? Kate? Have you lost your mind? Let's get you inside, Kate said, ignoring the question. You're half frozen. In the warmth of the house, Kate helped Sarah remove her outer garments and settled her near the fire with a cup of hot tea. Her sister's hands shook as she raised the cup to her lips. Now, Kate said gently, tell me what's happened. Where's David? Why aren't you in Santa Fe? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. David's dead, she said, her voice breaking on the words. Influenza swept through Santa Fe last month. David, his father. Half the town, it seemed. Kate sat stunned, trying to absorb the news. Oh, Sarah, she murmured, taking her sister's cold hands. I'm so sorry. They died within days of each other, Sarah continued, her voice hollow. I nursed them both, but there was nothing to be done. After the funerals, David's mother made it clear I wasn't welcome to stay. I had nowhere else to go. You'll stay here, Kate said firmly. This is your home too. Sarah managed a weak smile. I didn't know if you'd have me. After everything I said about selling the ranch, about how you couldn't manage alone. None of that matters now, Kate assured her. You're here, that's what counts. Sarah's gaze drifted to the window, where Akila could be seen leading her horse to the stable. But Kate, an Indian, living here? What will people think? Kate sighed, her momentary relief at seeing her sister dimmed by the familiar argument. I don't care what people think, Sarah. Akila saved my life during the first snowstorm. He's the reason the ranch is still standing, the cattle still alive. I wouldn't have made it through this winter without him. Sarah studied her sister's face with sudden intensity. You care for him, she said slowly, the realization dawning in her eyes. He works for me, Kate replied, too quickly. Kate Sullivan, Sarah said, a hint of her old spirit returning. I've known you all your life, you can't lie to me. Kate rose abruptly, moving to stoke the fire. You're exhausted and grieving. You should rest. We can talk more later. Sarah didn't press the issue, but her knowing gaze followed Kate around the room. I'm sorry to arrive unexpectedly, she said instead. I should have sent word. How could you? Kate countered. The passes have been nearly impassable for weeks. Captain Monroe managed it, Sarah remarked. I encountered him and his men on the trail yesterday. He said he'd visited you recently. Kate stiffened. You spoke with Monroe? Briefly. He was quite concerned about you, especially when I mentioned I was your sister. He escorted me part of the way. Sarah hesitated. He also mentioned your employee, warned me to be cautious. A cold weight settled in Kate's stomach. Monroe doesn't know anything about Akila or this ranch. He seemed to think he did, Sarah replied. He asked many questions about your father, the ranch, whether you had other family. Her voice softened. Kate, he implied. That is, he suggested your situation here might be improper. Improper, Kate repeated, anger flaring. What exactly did he suggest? Sarah looked uncomfortable. That perhaps your relationship with the Apache man wasn't strictly professional. He seemed quite disturbed by the possibility. Kate's hands clenched into fists. Monroe has no right. He said he'd be back, Sarah interrupted, with more men, to resolve the situation, as he put it. The implications were clear. Monroe suspected Akila's true identity and intended to arrest him, or worse. And now he had the added motivation of wounded pride, believing Kate had rejected him in favor of an Apache. When? Kate demanded. When is he coming back? He didn't say exactly. Soon, I gathered. Kate moved to the window, scanning the horizon with new urgency. Sarah, listen to me. Monroe is dangerous. To me, to Akila, maybe even to you now that you're here. Whatever he told you, whatever he implied, you can't trust him. Sarah looked bewildered. Kate, he's an army officer. Who has a personal vendetta against Akila and now against me, Kate finished. Please, Sarah, trust me on this. Before Sarah could respond, the door opened and Akila entered, stomping snow from his boots. He hesitated when he saw the sisters' serious expressions. Your horse is settled, he said to Sarah, keeping his distance. I've given her extra feed. She was exhausted. Thank you, Sarah replied stiffly. An awkward silence fell. Kate moved into the breach. Akila, Sarah has brought news. Captain Monroe may be returning soon, with more men. Akila's expression didn't change, but Kate had learned to read the subtle shifts in his posture. He was preparing for flight. No, she said firmly, answering his unspoken thought. Running isn't an option this time. Kate, Sarah began, what exactly is happening here? Why is Captain Monroe so interested in Akila? Kate and Akila exchanged a long look. Finally, Kate nodded. Akila turned to Sarah, his voice calm and measured. I worked as a scout for the army at Fort Union, he explained. When I discovered they were using my information to attack peaceful camps, women, children, elders, I began warning my people. Eventually, I left, rather than continue helping them. You deserted, Sarah translated. Yes, Akila acknowledged without shame. To them I am a traitor. To my people, I betrayed them by working with the army at all. I belong nowhere. Sarah looked between Akila and her sister. And you've been harboring him, knowing this. I didn't know at first, Kate admitted. By the time I learned the truth, it didn't matter anymore. He's a good man, Sarah. He doesn't deserve what Monroe wants to do to him. The silence stretched as Sarah processed this information. Finally, she sighed. It seems I've walked into quite a situation. You should rest, Kate suggested again. You've had a long journey. We can discuss this more when you're refreshed. Sarah nodded, suddenly looking every bit as exhausted as she must have felt. Kate helped her to the small bedroom that had once been their father's study, now converted to accommodate guests. When Kate returned to the main room, Akila was by the window again, his stance alert and watchful. I should leave, he said without turning. My presence endangers you both now. Kate crossed to stand beside him. And where would you go? The snow is still deep in the mountains. Monroe has men patrolling the area. You wouldn't make it 5 miles. I am Jicarilla, Akila reminded her. I know these mountains better than any white soldier. And if you did make it, Kate challenged. Then what? Back to wandering between worlds? Always looking over your shoulder? Akila finally turned to her, his dark eyes searching her face. What other choice is there? Kate took a deep breath. We fight, she said simply. This is my land, my ranch. Monroe has no authority here without cause. I am the cause, Akila pointed out. A deserter. In some eyes, a traitor. In my eyes, Kate said softly, you're the man who saved my life, who helped save this ranch, who showed me what real strength looks like. She stepped closer, her heart beating rapidly. I won't let them take you, Akila. I can't. Something flickered in his expression. Hope, perhaps, or a recognition of the feeling she couldn't quite express. Slowly, hesitantly, he raised a hand to her face, his fingers just barely brushing her cheek. Kate, he said, her name little more than a breath on his lips. The moment stretched between them, fragile and charged with possibility. Kate felt herself leaning toward him, drawn by a force she no longer wanted to resist. A sound from the bedroom broke the spell. Sarah, calling Kate's name. They stepped apart quickly, the connection severed, but not forgotten. We will find a way, Kate promised before turning to attend to her sister. That night, as a fresh snow began to fall outside, Kate lay awake in her bed, thoughts churning. Monroe would return, perhaps as soon as tomorrow. If he brought enough men, there would be little she could do to stop them from taking Akila. Unless an idea began to form, dangerous, perhaps even foolish, but possibly their only chance. Kate slipped from her bed and moved silently to Akila's room off the kitchen. She hesitated only briefly before knocking softly on the door. Akila opened it almost immediately, clearly as sleepless as she was. He wore only buckskin leggings, his chest bare in the dim light. Kate tried not to let her gaze linger on the smooth copper skin and defined muscles. I have a plan, she whispered, conscious of Sarah sleeping nearby. But I'll need your help, and Sarah's. Akila stepped back, allowing her into the small room. As Kate outlined her desperate scheme, she watched his expression shift from skepticism to grudging admiration. It might work, he conceded when she finished. But the risk is mine to take, Kate insisted. This is my choice, Akila. He studied her in the lamplight, his dark eyes intense. Why would you do this for me? The question hung between them, demanding the truth Kate had been avoiding for weeks. Standing there in the quiet darkness, she could no longer deny what her heart had known for some time. Because somewhere between that first snowstorm and now, she said softly, you became more than just a hired hand to me, more than just someone who helped save the ranch. She took a shaky breath. You became the person I can't imagine living without. Akila remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable in the shadows. For one terrible moment, Kate feared she had misunderstood everything between them. Then he moved forward, closing the distance between them in one fluid step. His hand came up to cradle her face, infinitely gentle, and this time there was no hesitation. I have wanted to do this, he murmured, from the moment I saw fire in your hair and in your eyes. When his lips finally met hers, Kate felt as though something long frozen inside her had suddenly thawed. The kiss was tender at first, almost reverent, before deepening into something urgent and necessary. Kate's arms wound around his neck, drawing him closer, the heat of his bare skin warming her through the thin fabric of her nightgown. When they finally parted, breathless, Akila rested his forehead against hers. If this plan fails, he said quietly, Monroe will not forgive either of us. Then we won't fail, Kate replied with a confidence she almost felt. We can't. Outside, the snow continued to fall, a silent witness to promises exchanged in whispers and sealed with kisses. Tomorrow would bring danger and difficult choices, but for tonight, in the shelter of Akila's arms, Kate found a peace she had never known before, and a courage she would need in the trials to come. Dawn broke clear and cold, the fresh snow glittering in the early light. Kate stood on the porch, watching the eastern horizon turn pink and gold. Behind her, Sarah emerged from the house, wrapping a shawl tightly around her shoulders. Are you sure about this? Sarah asked, her voice low with concern. It's not too late to change your mind. Kate turned to her sister with a resolute expression. I've never been more certain of anything. Sarah sighed, studying Kate's face. You love him that much? I do, Kate answered simply, the truth of it settling into her bones like warmth. And after David, after everything you've been through, can you really say you don't understand what it means to follow your heart, even when the world disapproves? Sarah's eyes softened with shared grief and understanding. I just don't want you to get hurt. The only thing that would hurt me now is losing him, Kate replied. The sound of hoofbeats in the distance cut their conversation short. Kate's hand instinctively went to the rifle propped against the wall. "They're coming sooner than we expected," she said, scanning the horizon. "Sarah, are you ready?" Sarah straightened her spine, a flash of the old Sullivan determination crossing her face. "I am." "Then let's go. And remember, let me do the talking." The sisters retreated inside, where Akila waited by the fire. He wore a clean blue shirt and had tied his long hair back neatly at the nape of his neck. The only outward sign of his tension was the slight tightening around his eyes as he met Kate's gaze. "It's time," she said quietly. Akila nodded once, moving to stand beside her. His hand found hers briefly, a silent reassurance and promise. Kate drew strength from the touch, squaring her shoulders as the sound of approaching riders grew louder. Captain Monroe arrived with 6 men, twice the number he'd brought before. They formed a loose semicircle in front of the ranch house, their horses stamping restlessly in the snow. Monroe dismounted first, his confident stride and tight smile suggesting a man who expected to get his way. "Miss Sullivan," he called as he approached the porch. "I trust you are well?" Kate stepped outside, her expression carefully neutral. "Captain Monroe, this is a surprise." "Is it?" Monroe's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I believe I mentioned I would return. Your sister arrived safely, I see." "Yes, thank you for escorting her part way," Kate replied evenly. "Sarah is resting inside. The journey was difficult for her." Monroe nodded, his gaze moving past Kate to the doorway where Akila now stood. His expression hardened. "I'm afraid this isn't a social call, Miss Sullivan," he said, abandoning any pretense of pleasantry. "I've come for your employee." He spat the last word as if it tasted bitter. "On what grounds?" Kate challenged. Monroe's eyebrows rose slightly at her defiance. "Desertion from Army service, possible collaboration with hostile forces, theft of Army property." He smiled thinly. "Shall I continue?" Kate descended the steps to stand directly before Monroe, close enough that he had to look down to meet her gaze. "Captain, I believe you're laboring under a misunderstanding." "Am I?" "Yes," Kate replied firmly. "The man you seek, a deserter, a traitor, whatever you choose to call him, is not here." Monroe's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Miss Sullivan, do you take me for a fool? He's standing right behind you." Kate didn't flinch. "That man is my husband." The words hung in the crisp morning air. Behind her she heard one of Monroe's men mutter in disbelief. Monroe himself seemed momentarily speechless, his face flushing with anger or embarrassment, or both. "Your husband," he finally managed. "Yes," Kate continued smoothly. "We were married 2 weeks ago by a traveling preacher caught in the snowstorm. My sister was too ill to attend, but she's here now and can confirm our union." She turned slightly. "Akila, would you ask Sarah to join us?" Akila disappeared inside briefly, returning with Sarah at his side. If Sarah was nervous about the deception, she hid it well, her expression composed and dignified despite the hostility emanating from the soldiers. "Mrs. Blake," Monroe greeted her stiffly, "I'm sorry to disturb your rest. Your sister has just made a rather extraordinary claim." Sarah glanced at Kate, then back to Monroe. "That she and Akila are married. Yes, it's true. When I arrived yesterday I was surprised as well, but they seem very happy together." She even managed a small, genuine-looking smile. "My sister always did have a mind of her own." Monroe's jaw tightened. "A convenient story. Perhaps you can explain how a deserter from Fort Union, yes, I know exactly who he is, happened to become your brother-in-law." "I don't know what you're talking about, Captain," Kate replied, with convincing puzzlement. "My husband is Kate Sullivan, a Jicarilla trader who stayed to help when my father died last year. We grew close over the winter. These things happen in isolated places." "Sullivan?" Monroe repeated incredulously. "Yes." Kate met his gaze steadily. "My name, our name now." Monroe turned his attention to Akila, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. "You, what do you have to say about this?" Akila stepped forward to stand beside Kate, his presence solid and reassuring. "My wife speaks the truth," he said simply, the words sending an unexpected thrill through Kate despite the circumstances. "This is absurd," Monroe snapped. "No one will believe this charade. Even if there was a marriage, which I highly doubt, it wouldn't be recognized under territorial law. Mixed marriages are prohibited. Actually, Captain, Sarah interjected smoothly, that's not entirely accurate. New Mexico territory has no specific prohibition against marriages between whites and Indians, unlike some other territories. It's unusual, certainly, but not illegal. Monroe glared at Sarah, clearly not expecting resistance from that quarter. Mrs. Blake, you surprise me. I would have thought you at least would oppose such an arrangement. Sarah lifted her chin. My sister's happiness is what matters to me, Captain, and I've never seen her happier than she is with Akila. She glanced at Kate with a smile that to Kate's surprise seemed genuine. Besides, he's saved her life twice now. I'd say that earns him the right to be part of our family. Monroe's frustration was evident as he looked between the three of them. This changes nothing, he insisted. Desertion is a serious offense. Marriage, real or invented, doesn't erase it. You're making a grave accusation, Captain, Kate said coldly. Do you have proof that my husband is this deserter you seek? The resemblance... Is that sufficient grounds to arrest a man? A resemblance? Kate interrupted. Perhaps all Apache men look alike to you, but I assure you, they are as individual as you or I. Monroe's face darkened with anger. Mind your tone, Miss Sullivan. Mrs. Sullivan, Kate corrected firmly. For a moment it seemed Monroe might lose his composure entirely. One hand moved toward his sidearm before he visibly collected himself. Very well, he said through clenched teeth. For now, I'll accept your situation. But this isn't over. I'll be watching both of you. Is that a threat, Captain? Akila spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but carrying a dangerous edge. Monroe's gaze shifted to him, cold and calculating. Consider it a promise. One step out of line, one reason to suspect you're not who you claim to be, and I'll be back with twice the men and a warrant that even this clever deception won't circumvent. He turned back to Kate, his expression softening into something almost regretful. You could have done better, Miss Sullivan, much better. Remember that when the novelty of your arrangement wears off. Without waiting for a response, Monroe returned to his horse and mounted with practiced efficiency. Men, we're leaving, he ordered. As he turned his mount, he called back over his shoulder. I'll be sure to inform the townspeople of the happy news. I'm certain they'll be as surprised as I was. Kate, Akila, and Sarah stood motionless on the porch, watching as Monroe and his men rode away. Only when they had disappeared from sight did Kate release the breath she'd been holding. That went better than I expected, she admitted. And worse, Akila said grimly. He doesn't believe us. He'll be back. Sarah shivered, pulling her shawl tighter. He'll spread the word in town just as he threatened. You know what that means, Kate. Kate nodded slowly. Isolation. Whispers. Perhaps worse. Not perhaps, Akila corrected. Definitely worse. A white woman with an Apache husband. He shook his head. They won't accept it. Either of us. I don't need them to accept it, Kate said fiercely. This is our land. Our life. Sarah touched her sister's arm gently. Kate, be realistic. You need to sell goods in town, buy supplies. If they turn against you completely, then we'll find another town, Kate said, though she knew it wasn't that simple. The nearest alternative was nearly 2 days' ride away. Akila's expression had grown distant. Perhaps I should still leave, he said quietly. Once the passes are clear, you could say I abandoned you. They would welcome you back then. No. Kate's voice was steel and fire combined. We've made our choice. I've made mine. I won't turn back now. Akila searched her face, finding only determination there. Slowly he nodded. Then we face whatever comes. Together. Inside the house, seated around the fire with steaming cups of coffee, the three of them discussed their next steps. The immediate danger had passed, but greater challenges lay ahead. We'll need to make the lie real, Sarah said practically. If Monroe investigates, and he will, he'll look for documentation, witnesses. The preacher was fictional, Kate pointed out, and with the snowstorms no one would question why there's no record yet. But eventually, there would need to be something official, Sarah insisted, especially if... She hesitated, glancing between them. Especially if there were to be children. The word hung in the air, carrying implications none of them had fully considered until that moment. Kate felt heat rise to her cheeks as she deliberately avoided looking at Akila. Pastor Williams in Pine Creek, Sarah continued, filling the awkward silence. He's known for his progressive views. He might be willing to perform a legitimate ceremony, backdate the records. Kate stared at her sister in surprise. Sarah Blake, are you suggesting forgery? A faint smile touched Sarah's lips. I'm suggesting we make fiction into truth, for everyone's protection. She sobered. Kate, if you truly love him, if this isn't just some reckless defiance, then make it real. Not just for appearances, but for yourselves. Kate finally glanced at Akila, finding him watching her with an unreadable expression. What do you think? She asked softly. I think, he said carefully, that we should speak privately. Sarah rose immediately. I'll check on the animals, she offered, diplomatically excusing herself. When they were alone, Akila moved to sit beside Kate on the small sofa. This began as a deception, he said quietly, a way to protect me from Monroe. Yes, Kate acknowledged, but what I told you last night was true. My feelings are real, Akila. He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. As are mine. But marriage, that is different. Sacred. Not something to decide in haste or fear. Is that what you think I'm doing? Kate asked, hurt creeping into her voice. Making a rash decision? Akila shook his head. No, but I must be certain you understand what you're choosing. A life with me will never be easy. There will always be men like Monroe, places we cannot go together, children who may suffer for their mixed blood. His dark eyes held hers. I would spare you that if I could. I don't want to be spared, Kate replied fiercely. I want to be with you. Here on this land my father built, the rest we'll face it as it comes. Akila studied her face for a long moment, as if memorizing each feature. Then ask me properly, he said finally, a hint of that rare smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Not for Monroe's benefit, not for appearances. Ask me as Kate Sullivan, the woman I love. Kate's heart swelled at the words. She turned fully toward him, taking both his hands in hers. Akila, she began, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. Will you marry me? Not pretend, not for show, but truly become my husband? Share this land, this life, whatever may come? Yes, he answered without hesitation, the single word carrying the weight of 1,000 promises. I will be yours, and you will be mine, in the way of your people and mine. He leaned forward then, sealing the promise with a kiss that spoke of devotion and desire in equal measure. When they parted, Kate rested her forehead against his, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them to this moment, from strangers to reluctant allies, to something far deeper and more profound. Your sister is right about Pine Creek, Akila said after a comfortable silence. When the snow clears enough, we should go. Kate nodded, reluctant to break the spell of the moment, but aware of practical considerations. What about your people? Will they accept this? Accept me? Akila's expression grew thoughtful. Some will, some won't. My mother's family might understand better than most. He brushed a strand of copper hair from her face. But we need not decide everything today. The passes won't clear for weeks yet. Weeks, Kate repeated with a small smile. Trapped here with nothing but time. And your sister, Akila reminded her, though his eyes had darkened with an emotion that made Kate's breath catch. And my sister, she agreed, who seemed surprisingly supportive for someone who wanted me to sell the ranch and move to town just a few months ago. Akila's expression sobered. Grief changes people. Loss makes clear what matters. His hand cupped her cheek. For her, family is what remains. For me, it is you. The weeks that followed brought a new rhythm to the ranch. Sarah's presence changed the dynamic, but in ways Kate hadn't anticipated. Far from being the disapproving chaperone, Sarah seemed to blossom in the structured routine of ranch life. The grief that had shrouded her since David's death gradually receded, replaced by a quiet determination to be useful. She took over much of the cooking and household management, freeing Kate and Akila to focus on the ranch work. The three of them developed an easy camaraderie, sharing meals and evenings by the fire. Sarah even began to draw Akila out, asking questions about his people, his customs, his life before the Sullivan Ranch. In the Jicarilla tradition, Akila explained one evening, marriage is not just between two people but between families. The couple lives with the bride's family for a year. then with the groom's family for a year before establishing their own home. "So you'd be expected to take Kate to live with your people?" Sarah asked, intrigued. Akila glanced at Kate. "Traditionally, yes, but traditions can adapt when necessary." "What other customs should Kate know?" Sarah prompted, genuinely interested. As Akila described Jicarilla wedding ceremonies, gift exchanges, and family structures, Kate watched her sister's growing fascination with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. Sarah was making an effort, not just to tolerate Akila for Kate's sake, but to understand and respect the culture he came from. "Perhaps," Sarah suggested hesitantly, "you could incorporate some of those traditions when you formalize your marriage, a blending of both worlds." The idea took root, and in the quieter moments when they were alone, Kate and Akila began to plan not just a legal ceremony in Pine Creek, but a private celebration that would honor both their heritages. As March arrived, bringing warmer days and gradual snowmelt, the isolation of winter began to ease. The first traders ventured through the newly passable routes, bringing news from town and beyond. The reports confirmed what they had feared. Monroe had indeed spread word of Kate's marriage, and the reaction had been predictably hostile. "Richardson's offering to buy the ranch again," one sympathetic trader informed them. "Says he'd take it off your hands before the Apache problem devalues it completely." Kate's response had been unprintable. Another trader, an elderly man who had known Patrick Sullivan well, was more supportive. "Your pa was a good judge of character," he told Kate. "If he'd lived to know this fella and he saw how you look at each other, he'd have given his blessing. Most folks'll come around eventually. Some never will. That's just the way of things." Kate held on to those words as they prepared for their journey to Pine Creek. The small settlement was far enough removed from Cielo Rojo that Monroe's influence might not have reached it yet, and Pastor Williams was indeed known for his unconventional views on equality and justice. The day before their planned departure, Akila returned from checking the northern pastures with news that changed everything. "Soldiers," he reported grimly. "A full patrol, camped by the creek." "Monroe?" Kate asked, her stomach tightening with dread. Akila shook his head. "Didn't see him, but they're watching the trails. All the trails." Sarah joined them on the porch, her expression concerned. "Do you think they know our plans?" "Possibly," Akila admitted, "or Monroe is simply making good on his threat to watch us." "We can't risk Pine Creek," Kate said decisively. "If they're monitoring all the trails, then we're trapped here," Sarah finished. Akila's expression grew distant, his gaze moving to the western mountains. "Not necessarily," he said slowly. "There is another way. A path my people use. No white man knows it." Kate understood immediately. "Through Apache territory?" Akila nodded. "It would take us north, then east. We could reach Pine Creek from the other side, avoiding the soldiers entirely." "But the risk," Sarah began, "is less than trying to pass through a military patrol looking specifically for us," Kate pointed out. Akila touched Kate's arm gently. "My people may not welcome you," he warned. "It has been some time since I visited them." "Would they harm us?" Sarah asked bluntly. Akila considered the question carefully. "No, but they might refuse to let us pass, or insist I stay." "Then we'll face that if it happens," Kate said with more confidence than she felt. "Right now, we need to focus on avoiding Monroe and his men." They left before dawn the next morning, traveling light and fast. Sarah had insisted on accompanying them, unwilling to remain alone at the ranch with soldiers nearby. Akila led them through terrain Kate had never explored, narrow canyons and hidden valleys that seemed to materialize from nowhere in the seemingly impenetrable mountain face. By midday, Kate knew they had entered Jicarilla territory. Akila's demeanor had changed subtly, more alert, more attuned to his surroundings. Twice he halted abruptly, listening to sounds Kate couldn't hear, before changing their direction slightly. "We're being watched," he said quietly when they stopped to rest the horses. "Have been for the last hour." Kate scanned the rocky outcroppings above them but saw nothing. "Your people," Akila nodded. "They'll approach soon. When they do, let me speak first." Sarah looked nervously at the surrounding cliffs. "Will they be hostile?" "Cautious," Akila corrected. "I'm bringing strangers through their territory. They have a right to question that." They had just remounted when 3 riders appeared as if from nowhere, blocking the narrow trail ahead. All were Apache men, dressed in a mixture of traditional clothing and items clearly obtained through trade with white settlers. Their expressions were guarded but not openly hostile. The leader, a middle-aged man with lines of authority etched into his weathered face, addressed Akila in the Jicarilla language. Akila responded in kind, the musical syllables flowing easily from his tongue. Kate watched the exchange intently, noting how the other men's expressions shifted from suspicion to surprise as Akila continued speaking. Finally, the leader switched to English, his accent more pronounced than Akila's. "So, you return, Windwalker, with a white wife and her sister." His dark eyes assessed Kate with open curiosity. The stories from the settlement speak of this, but few believed them. Kate straightened in her saddle. "The stories are true," she said firmly. "I am Kate Sullivan. This is my sister, Sarah Blake. We mean no disrespect by passing through your territory." The man studied her for a long moment before a slight smile creased his face. "She has fire, this one," he remarked to Akila. "Like your mother." He inclined his head toward Kate. "I am Tall Pine. I knew Akila's father before the sickness took him." "We seek passage to Pine Creek," Akila explained. "The white soldiers watch the usual trails." Tall Pine's expression darkened. "Yes, they have been more active lately, pushing farther into our hunting grounds." He made a decision. "You will come with us. The elders will want to speak with you." Akila hesitated. "We are expected in Pine Creek." "The white settlement will still be there tomorrow," Tall Pine said dismissively. "Tonight you are with your people. Your wife should see where you come from." The way Tall Pine emphasized wife made Kate wonder if he truly believed their union was legitimate. Before she could dwell on it further, Akila had agreed to the detour, and they were following the three men deeper into the mountains. The Jicarilla camp was nestled in a protected valley, invisible until they were nearly upon it. Conical hide dwellings dotted the landscape, interspersed with more permanent wooden structures. Smoke from cooking fires drifted lazily upward in the afternoon air. Children paused in their play to watch the newcomers with undisguised curiosity. Women looked up from their tasks, their expressions ranging from surprise to outright disapproval. Kate felt acutely aware of her copper hair and pale skin as they dismounted in the center of the camp. Beside her, Sarah seemed to shrink into herself, overwhelmed by the stares directed their way. "Remember," Kate whispered to her sister, "we are guests here, just as they would be guests on our land." Sarah nodded, visibly steadying herself. "I'm fine," she assured Kate. "Just unexpected." An elderly woman emerged from one of the larger dwellings, her silver hair braided and wrapped with strips of red cloth. Though her body showed the effects of age, her movements were graceful and purposeful as she approached them. "Grandmother," Akila greeted her with evident respect, inclining his head slightly. The old woman studied him for a long moment before reaching up to touch his face gently. "You have been away too long, son of my daughter's husband," she said in clear English. "The mountains have missed your step." "I have missed them as well," Akila replied quietly. The woman's gaze shifted to Kate and Sarah. "These are the white women who travel with you. Won your wife, they say." Akila nodded. "This is Kate Sullivan, my wife in all but final ceremony, and her sister, Sarah Blake." The old woman approached Kate, her keen eyes missing nothing. "You have survived a harsh winter," she observed, "and found more than you expected in it." "Yes," Kate agreed simply. "Akila saved my life, twice." "And you saved his from the blue coats," the woman countered. "We hear things even in these mountains." A smile touched her lips briefly. "I am Morning Star, Akila's father's mother. You will eat with us tonight. Rest. Tomorrow is soon enough for your journey to continue." The invitation, delivered as a statement of fact rather than a question, brooked no argument. Kate and Sarah were led to a smaller dwelling where they could refresh themselves after the journey. Women brought water and food, dried meat, berries, and a hearty stew that Kate found surprisingly delicious. "They're more welcoming than I expected," Sarah murmured as they ate. "Some are," Kate agreed, noting the mixture of reactions they continued to receive from others in the camp. "Others not so much. Not unlike Cielo Rojo," Sarah pointed out wryly. "Just reversed." The observation struck Kate as profoundly true. Here they were the outsiders, the ones who didn't belong, just as Akila had been in the white settlements. The experience was unsettling but educational, giving her a glimpse into what Akila must have felt each day at the ranch. As evening approached, the camp gathered around a central fire. Akila rejoined them, having spent time with the tribal elders. He seemed more relaxed here than Kate had ever seen him, something in his posture suggesting he had temporarily set down a heavy burden. "The elders have agreed to our passage," he told them quietly. "We can leave in the morning." "That's wonderful," Sarah said, relief evident in her voice. Kate studied Akila's face, sensing something left unsaid. "But," she prompted gently. A shadow crossed his features. "They have also warned of increased military activity near Pine Creek. The soldiers are not just watching the trails. They are searching for something. Or someone. Monroe," Kate concluded grimly. "He must know what we're planning." Akila nodded. "It complicates things." "Should we return to the ranch?" Sarah asked. "Wait for a better time?" Kate's jaw set in determination. "No. We've come this far. We'll find a way to reach Pastor Williams." She glanced at Akila. "Unless you've changed your mind." His eyes softened as they met hers. "Never," he said simply. The evening progressed with food and stories shared around the fire. To Kate's surprise, Morningstar sat beside her, occasionally translating the tales being told in Jicarilla. "They speak of the time when Bear and Eagle contested for the rulership of the animals," the old woman explained, "and of how Mouse, smallest of all creatures, finally solved their dispute." Kate listened attentively, fascinated by the rich oral tradition. "Your stories are beautiful," she said sincerely. "Thank you for sharing them with us." Morningstar regarded her thoughtfully. "Akila says you fight for your father's land as fiercely as any warrior, that you understand what it means to belong to a place." "I do," Kate acknowledged. "The ranch is part of me, just as these mountains are part of your people." "And part of Akila," Morningstar added, "though he has wandered far." She tilted her head, studying Kate with those penetrating eyes. "What will you do when the winter ends and the land calls him to roam again?" The question caught Kate off guard. I don't know," she admitted. "I hadn't considered that he might want to leave." Morningstar nodded as if this confirmed something. His father was the same, a good man but restless. His spirit needed the open sky, the changing seasons. "My daughter understood this, accepted it. Can you?" Before Kate could respond, Akila approached, ending the conversation. But Morningstar's question lingered in Kate's mind as the evening drew to a close. Would Akila eventually feel trapped by the ranch, by the settled life she envisioned? Was she asking him to deny an essential part of his nature? Later, as they prepared to sleep in the dwelling assigned to them, Kate voiced her concerns. "Morningstar suggested you might not be content to stay in one place forever," she said carefully, "that your father was restless." Akila was quiet for a moment, arranging their bedding. "My father traveled with the seasons," he finally acknowledged. "He would be gone for months, returning with stories and trade goods." "And your mother, how did she feel about that?" "She accepted it as part of who he was," Akila said. "She had her own life, her own work in the camp. They loved differently than white couples, perhaps, but no less deeply." Kate absorbed this, trying to imagine such an arrangement. "Is that what you want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The freedom to come and go." Akila moved to sit beside her, taking her hands in his. "What I want," he said deliberately, "is you, the ranch, the life we are building." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But yes, there may be times when I need to journey, to visit my mother's people in the south, to trade, to be alone with the mountains for a while." "I see," Kate said, trying not to let disappointment color her tone. "But I will always return," Akila continued, his dark eyes intent on hers. "The difference between my father and me is that I have found my home, not in a place only, but in a person." His hand came up to touch her cheek. "In you, Kate Sullivan." The simple declaration melted her doubts like snow in spring sunshine. Kate leaned into his touch, understanding dawning. "We don't have to live exactly as others do," she realized aloud. "We can find our own way." "Yes," Akila agreed, smiling that rare smile that transformed his serious features. "Our own path between worlds." They left the Jicarilla camp at dawn, accompanied by 2 guides who would lead them safely to the eastern approach to Pine Creek. Morningstar had embraced Kate before their departure, pressing a small leather pouch into her hand. "For your wedding day," the old woman had said. "Herbs to bring blessing and fertility." Use them as my daughter would have, had she lived to see her son married. The gesture had moved Kate deeply. This acceptance from Akila's family, bridging cultural divides she had feared might be insurmountable. Their journey continued without incident until they were within sight of Pine Creek. Their guide stopped at the edge of a forest overlooking the small settlement in the valley below. "We go no further," one explained. "Too many white eyes." Kate thanked them sincerely for their assistance, and Akila exchanged words in Jicarilla that seemed formal and significant. As the guides melted back into the forest, Kate turned to Akila. "What did you say to them?" "That I would remember their help when the council fires burn," he translated. "It is a promise to speak well of them to the elders." They approached Pine Creek cautiously, alert for any sign of soldiers. The settlement was smaller than Cielo Rojo, just a cluster of buildings centered around a wooden church with a modest steeple. They observed from a distance before deciding it was safe to enter. Pastor Williams proved to be everything Sarah had described, an older man with kind eyes and firm convictions. He listened to their story without interruption, his expression thoughtful. "Captain Monroe has indeed been through here," he confirmed when they had finished. Asking questions about a white woman traveling with an Apache man, making veiled threats about the consequences of assisting them. Kate's heart sank. "Then you won't help us?" The pastor smiled gently. "My dear, I've been defying bullies like Monroe for 30 years. I'm too old to start fearing them now." He looked between Kate and Akila. "You wish to be married? Truly married? Before God and witnesses?" "Yes," they answered in unison. "Then we shall do so," Williams decided. "Tonight in the church, with your sister as witness." His smile turned slightly mischievous. "And as for the records showing you were married months ago during a snowstorm, well, paperwork has been known to get confused during harsh winters." Relief flooded through Kate. "Thank you, Pastor." "Don't thank me yet," he cautioned. "Your road will not be an easy one. Society does not look kindly on such unions, even when they are blessed by the church." "We know," Akila said quietly. "We have chosen this path with open eyes." Williams nodded approvingly. "Then let us prepare. You'll stay with me tonight, and tomorrow you can be on your way before Monroe's men return. They've been patrolling the area every 3 days or so." That evening, in the simple wooden church illuminated by candlelight, Kate Sullivan and Akila stood before Pastor Williams. Sarah watched from the first pew, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Kate wore her best dress, her copper hair loose around her shoulders as Akila preferred it. Around her neck hung a necklace of polished stones and silver that Morning Star had insisted she take. "My daughter would have wanted her son's wife to wear her wedding beads," the old woman had said. Akila wore clean buckskin leggings and the blue cotton shirt Kate had mended so many times over the winter. His black hair was tied back with a strip of leather decorated with a single eagle feather, a symbol of his Jicarilla heritage. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. Pastor Williams spoke of love transcending boundaries, of courage in the face of adversity, of two paths merging to form a new way forward. When it came time for their vows, Kate and Akila had prepared their own words, drawing from both their traditions. "I, Catherine Sullivan, take you, Akila, as my husband," Kate said clearly, her voice steady despite the emotion welling within her. "I promise to walk beside you through all seasons, to honor your spirit and your heritage, to build a home with you that welcomes all parts of who we are. As the land endures through winter and summer alike, so will my love for you remain constant and true." Akila's dark eyes never left hers as he spoke in return. "I, Akila, take you, Catherine Sullivan, as my wife. I promise to be your shelter in the storm, your companion on the journey, your equal partner in all things. As the eagle mates for life, returning always to the same nest, so will I return always to you, no matter how far I may roam. My heart has found its home in you, and there it will remain until I walk the spirit path." Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, and when Akila finally kissed her, Kate felt as though everything in her life had been leading to this moment. Every struggle, every loss, every difficult choice culminating in this union that defied convention and expectation. Sarah embraced them both afterward, her earlier reservations seemingly forgotten. "Father would be proud," she whispered to Kate. Truly, he would. They spent the night in the small rooms attached to the church, planning to leave at first light. Pastor Williams provided them with marriage documents dated 3 months earlier, listing a fictional traveling preacher as the officiant. "For your protection," he explained, "should anyone question the legitimacy of your union." As Kate lay beside Akila that night, her husband now in truth as well as name, she felt a sense of peace settle over her, despite the challenges that awaited them. "Are you happy?" Akila asked softly, his arm around her waist. Kate turned to face him in the darkness. "Completely," she answered truthfully. "And you?" "More than I believed possible," he said, his voice rich with emotion. "When I came to your ranch that day, I sought only shelter from the winter. Instead, I found a home, a family." His hand cradled her face tenderly. "A love I never expected." Kate pressed closer to him, savoring the warmth and strength of his body against hers. "Whatever comes next," she promised, "we face it together. No more standing between worlds. We create our own." Their return journey to the ranch took them along hidden trails Akila knew well, avoiding the main routes where Monroe's men might be watching. They traveled swiftly but cautiously, hyper-aware that their brief respite from danger had ended the moment they left Pine Creek. 3 days later, they crested the final ridge overlooking the Sullivan Ranch. The sight that greeted them stopped them cold. Riders circled the property, not just Monroe's soldiers, but what appeared to be Richardson's men as well. Smoke rose from one of the outbuildings, flames visible even at this distance. "No," Kate whispered, horror washing over her. "They're burning the ranch." Akila's expression hardened. "Not all of it. Not yet." He turned to Kate and Sarah, his voice urgent but controlled. "Stay here. Hidden. I'll go closer, see what's happening." "I'm coming with you," Kate insisted. "Kate," Sarah pleaded, "if they see you—" "It's my ranch," Kate said fiercely. "I won't hide while they destroy it." Akila recognized the futility of arguing. "We stay together then, but we observe only. No confrontation. Not yet." They left their horses secured in a hidden gully and approached on foot, using the terrain for cover. As they drew nearer, voices carried on the wind, angry shouts, laughter, the distinct commands of Captain Monroe directing his men. From their vantage point behind a rocky outcropping, they could see the full extent of the situation. The stable was ablaze beyond saving. Cattle had been driven from their pens and were being herded by Richardson's cowboys. Soldiers methodically searched the house, carrying out items and loading them onto wagons. "They're looting the place," Sarah whispered in disbelief. "Looking for evidence," Akila corrected grimly. "Proof of who I really am. And taking whatever else they want in the process." Kate's hands clenched into fists as she watched her father's legacy being systematically dismantled. "How dare they?" she hissed. "By what right?" "By no right," Akila said, his voice hard, "but with all the power." As they watched, Captain Monroe emerged from the house, conferring with a man Kate recognized as Richardson's foreman. Words drifted up to their hiding place. "Clearly abandoned the property," Monroe was saying. "Sullivan woman probably ran off with that Apache. Territory law is clear. Abandoned property reverts to territorial control, especially when the owner is suspected of harboring a fugitive." "And Richardson's claim?" the foreman asked. "Will be given priority consideration," Monroe replied smoothly, "once the proper paperwork is filed." Kate had heard enough. She started to rise, only to be pulled back down by Akila's firm grip. "No," he said quietly but firmly. "That is exactly what they want. For us to reveal ourselves, for me to be captured, for you to be humiliated, for both of us to lose everything." "We're losing everything anyway," Kate argued, gesturing toward the burning stable. "My father's ranch—" "Buildings can be rebuilt," Akila interrupted. "Land endures. But if Monroe takes me, and he will if he sees me, there will be no return, no future." The truth of his words penetrated Kate's anger. She subsided reluctantly, tears of frustration burning in her eyes. "So we just watch? Let them take everything?" "No," Akila said, his expression resolute. "We retreat, regroup, find another way." He glanced at Sarah, who had remained silent, watching the destruction with a pale face. "Your sister needs safety, shelter." Sarah shook her head. "Don't make decisions based on me. I can manage." Akila's respect for her was evident in his nod of acknowledgement. "Still, we need a plan, resources, Allies. Kate took one last look at the ranch, her home, the only place she had ever truly belonged. Smoke curled from the burning stable. Men moved through spaces that had once been private and sacred. Cattle that had been her livelihood were being driven away. The pain was physical, a hollowness spreading through her chest. "Where will we go?" she asked, her voice small. Akila's hand found hers warm and steady. "First, to my people. They will shelter us while we consider our options." "And then?" Sarah pressed. A flicker of the old determination returned to Kate's eyes as she turned away from the scene below. "Then we fight back," she said firmly. "This isn't over. Not by a long measure." They retreated as carefully as they had approached, returning to their horses without detection. As they prepared to ride, Kate paused, looking back toward the ranch one last time. "I will return," she promised silently. "This is still my land, my home." Her gaze shifted to Akila, steadfast beside her, and to Sarah, who had chosen to stand with them despite everything. Our home. With that vow locked in her heart, Kate turned her horse toward the mountains and the temporary sanctuary they offered. Behind them, smoke continued to rise from the Sullivan Ranch, a dark smudge against the blue New Mexico sky. Ahead lay uncertainty, challenge, and the promise of a future they would forge together, between worlds, beyond boundaries, in the space they created with love and determination. 1 year later, the morning sun painted the mountains gold as Kate stepped onto the porch of the small cabin, steam rising from the coffee cup in her hands. The valley spread before her, green with spring, the rebuilt Sullivan Ranch a testament to perseverance and hard work. "Beautiful morning," Sarah remarked, joining her sister. "The apple trees are blooming early this year." Kate nodded, smiling at the sight of the small orchard they had planted in the fall. Pa would be pleased. He always wanted fruit trees. Much had changed in the year since they had watched their home burn. The journey back had been longer and harder than any of them could have imagined, filled with setbacks and small victories, moments of despair and unexpected joy. The Jicarilla had sheltered them through that difficult spring, Morning Star opening her dwelling to the 3 refugees without hesitation. During those months, Kate had immersed herself in Akila's culture, learning the language, the customs, the rhythms of a life so different from her own. Sarah had surprised everyone by forming a close bond with a young Jicarilla widow named Soft Rain, who taught her traditional medicines and healing practices. "I was a teacher before I married David," Sarah had explained, when Kate expressed surprise at her sister's new interests. "I've always loved learning, and after losing him, helping others heal feels right." Their return to the ranch had been made possible through an unexpected ally, Judge Franklin from Santa Fe, who had known their father and was appalled by Monroe's abuse of power. The judge had launched an investigation that revealed collusion between the captain and Richardson to seize valuable properties throughout the territory. Military officers using their positions to acquire land for personal gain, the judge had explained during his visit to the Jicarilla camp. "It's been happening for years, but Monroe was particularly brazen. He's been recalled to Washington to face charges. With Monroe disgraced and Richardson fighting his own legal battles, the path had cleared for Kate and Akila to reclaim the Sullivan Ranch. The damage had been extensive, the stable burned to the ground, the house ransacked, livestock scattered, but the land remained and with it the foundation for rebuilding. The work had been grueling. Friends from the Jicarilla tribe had helped raise new structures. Traders who had known and respected Patrick Sullivan contributed supplies. Even a few townsfolk from Cielo Rojo, their attitudes softened by the revelation of Monroe's corruption, offered assistance. Now, almost exactly a year after their wedding in Pine Creek, the ranch was alive again. Different, reimagined, a blend of Kate's practical ranching knowledge and Akila's sustainable hunting and farming traditions. Smaller in scale but more diverse, with gardens and the new orchard supplementing the reduced cattle operation. "Do you think they'll come today?" Sarah asked, interrupting Kate's reflections. Kate's hand drifted unconsciously to her rounded belly. "Akila said they would. The baby will be here within the month. Morning Star wouldn't miss the blessing ceremony." As if summoned by her thoughts, Akila appeared at the edge of the property, leading his horse. He had been gone for 3 days, visiting his mother's family in the south and hunting on the return journey. Kate felt the familiar rush of joy at seeing him, still as powerful as it had been that first winter when she realized she loved him. "Sarah," Kate said, not taking her eyes off her approaching husband, "would you check on the bread? I think I smell it burning." Sarah laughed, knowing perfectly well the bread was fine. "Take your time," she said, squeezing Kate's shoulder before disappearing inside. Kate set down her coffee cup and moved to meet Akila, her steps slower now with the weight of their child. His face brightened as he drew nearer, his eyes taking in her condition with a mixture of pride and concern. "You look well," he said when they reached each other. "Strong." "I am well," she assured him. "Better now that you're home." Akila tied his horse to the hitching post before gathering Kate carefully into his arms. "I missed you," he murmured against her hair. "Both of you." Kate leaned into his embrace, savoring the solid warmth of him. "Did you find your mother's cousins?" "Yes. They send gifts for the baby." Akila placed a hand gently on her stomach. "And news. Morning Star and the others will arrive tomorrow for the blessing." "Good," Kate said, relieved. "I want our child to know both sides of their heritage, to be proud of who they are, where they come from." Akila's expression grew serious. "It will not always be easy for them. A child of two worlds." "No," Kate agreed, "but they'll have us to guide them, and Sarah and both our families." She touched his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw. "Besides, we've proven that being between worlds can be a strength, not just a challenge." Akila smiled, that rare, full smile that still made Kate's heart flutter. "True. Look what we've built here." His gaze swept over the ranch, the new stable, the expanded garden plots, the repaired house now decorated with a blend of white settler and Jicarilla touches, something that belongs to both our traditions, yet is entirely our own. Kate thought of the journey that had brought them to this point, from reluctant employer and employee to partners in every sense, from strangers divided by suspicion to husband and wife, united in purpose and love, from isolated individuals to the center of a community that bridged cultural divides. "Judge Franklin says the territory is changing," she remarked as they walked hand in hand toward the house. "More people questioning the old ways of thinking, more marriages like ours." "Slowly," Akila cautioned. "Change comes slowly, but it comes." Inside, they found Sarah kneading dough for the evening meal, humming softly to herself. She looked up with a smile as they entered. "Welcome home," she greeted Akila warmly. "Successful journey?" "Very," he confirmed, setting down his pack. "And things here?" "Peaceful," Sarah reported. 2 new calves in the south pasture. Oh, and Pastor Williams sent a letter. She nodded toward the table where correspondence awaited. "He's planning to visit next month, wants to meet his newest parishioner when they arrive." Kate smiled at the thought of the kind pastor who had married them and remained a steadfast friend. "He'll be among the first to hold this little one after family." Later that evening, as the three of them sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Kate felt a sense of completion she had never known before. The ranch was thriving again, different but stronger for having weathered the storm. Her sister had found a new purpose in life, combining her teaching skills with her growing knowledge of traditional medicine. And Akila. She glanced at her husband, noting how the tension that had once seemed a permanent part of him had eased. He still journeyed occasionally, as they had agreed he could, but he always returned to her, to their home, to the life they were building together. "What are you thinking?" he asked, catching her gaze. Kate smiled, taking his hand and placing it on her belly where their child turned and kicked. "That some fights are worth every struggle," she said softly. "Every look you gave me, every touch that broke down my walls, worth everything that came after." Akila's eyes warmed with understanding and love. "Worth everything," he agreed, "and worth everything still to come." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Kate Sullivan, once solitary and defensive, now surrounded by family and open to all the future might bring, leaned against her husband's shoulder and knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place. Not in one world or the other, but in the beautiful, challenging space they had created between them. A space where love defied boundaries, where courage overcame prejudice, where two people from different worlds could build something entirely new, something that belonged only and completely to them. The end. Dear listener, the pages of this story between Kate and Akila may have touched your heart in ways that only you know. It's no coincidence that love stories that challenge boundaries move us deeply. They echo truths that we carry in our own journeys. Like Kate and Akila, we all know storms that threaten to destroy what we've built with such care. Perhaps you too have faced your own harsh winters, moments when you needed courage to continue when the path seemed impossible. Life rarely follows the path we plan. Sometimes, like Kate, we need to let go of what we thought we wanted to discover what we truly need. Other times, like Akila, we need to find the courage to stop wandering and allow ourselves to belong to something greater than ourselves. Remember, there is no age limit to rebuilding, to redefining boundaries, to discovering new forms of belonging. The years you carry are testimony to your resilience, not limitations to your possibilities. When night falls and you rest your head on the pillow, know that there is a strength within you as resilient as any character in our stories. A strength that has traversed decades, overcome losses, and still finds reasons to smile at dawn. May you sleep deeply tonight and every night, wrapped in the protective embrace of hope and possibility. And may you awaken remembering that, as Kate and Akila discovered, we don't need to belong entirely to one world or another. We can create our own space between worlds, a place where we are truly free to be who we are. The most beautiful gardens grow in the spaces between defined territories, and so too can the most authentic lives flourish when we refuse to be confined by the expectations of others. With gratitude for sharing this moment with us, the Wild West Whispers team. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this story. If Kate and Akila's journey moved your heart even a little, we invite you to subscribe, like, leave us a comment, and share this video with someone who loves stories of love, redemption, and powerful emotional twists as much as you do. Your support from the bottom of our hearts helps keep this channel alive and inspires us to continue creating stories that offer comfort, hope, and a little magic in your everyday life. And don't go just yet. At the end of this video, another beautiful story from our channel will appear. Click it and let yourself be swept away by another unforgettable journey. Thank you for being here. The Wild West Whispers team.